Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we talk about Cube with refreshments. I am your host, Magic, and I'm joined here today by my other host,
Anthony. How you doing today, Magic?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm just kind of vibing, enjoying the morning, and sitting here with my coffee. Speaking of,
I'm doing this.
Why don't you get into what you're drinking?
I'm going to have me a nice little cup of coffee, too. If you guys can tell, I've got a little bit of sniffles here. And May has been so kind as to give me a backup plan for recording an episode. And it's actually a topic that we've wanted to talk about for some time. But please pardon my voice and the dust as we actually go through this. But, you know, it's a nice distraction seeing that I've been cooped up in my office for about 4 days. So I'm ready to interact with another human and talk about some Cube. How about yourself, May?
Yeah, I'm really excited to just get into the conversation regarding this, because this is something that I've mentioned several times in our previous episodes of, in terms of topic, accessibility within Magic and within Cube is just a really important topic, especially as Cube designers, since we have access to all the cards ever printed.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I remember when I first started playing Magic, we just kind of used the little rules guides in the books, and we were able to navigate through the specialty rules. And it was pretty much an even playing field for the most part because we had opened up the packs at the same time. But as I told a lot of the listeners, I took about a 12-year hiatus after getting out of the military, and I kind of came back and started playing some Commander. And we had this good friend of ours, Kevin, who I need to have on the show. He is a collector by nature. He's always enjoyed just collecting cards. And I remember he passed around this Magic card one time while we're sitting there goofing off in his binder, and it was Chains of Mephistopheles. I probably messed that up so bad. But for one colorless and one black, you get an enchantment. And I'm going to read the original errata from Legends. Every time a player draws a card, that player must first discard a card from his or her hand, which is their hand. If there are no cards in player's hand, take top card from the library and place it in the graveyard instead of drawing. This enchantment does not apply to the first draw drawn by the player during the draw phase. May, what did that mean? What does that mean? What did I just say?
Those are certainly words.
Let's try this
I'm
again.
not sure if it's just early in the morning or if I feel like I'm smelling toast right now.
I have no idea what I just read, so I'm going to try to read the errata version. How brutal this card is. So he passed it around to me. I'm like, what the heck? And then we've got Chains of Mephistopheles. I'm going to try one more time, but this is actually from the errata. It's an enchantment. If a player would draw a card, except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, that player discards a card instead. If that player discards a card this way, they draw a card. If that player doesn't discard a card this way, they mill a card. One more time, May. How does this card work? I don't have a clue.
So what it's trying to say is when you're drawing a card, instead you discard a card first, then you may... wait. Hold on.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's actually why I wanted to show this card. So we can try to figure this card out all we want. And somebody's probably laughing their butt off right now.
Oh, definitely. Somebody who is just reading this and it's just like, oh, it's so simple. And it's just like, yes, but good luck trying to explain it to somebody without stuttering.
Oh, no, I'd have to parse this out. I mean, literally, I'm sure there's somebody that plays this card and they have fun with it and they're giggling their butts off right now. But to fully understand this card really puts the dynamics of what we're trying to talk about. And it's not just accessibility in terms of the nature of understanding the card and the volume of words that are printed on this card. But in addition to it, it also has to do with the fact that I'm wearing reading glasses. Mm-hmm. That's a point of accessibility for me, as in I'm having a hard time looking at the card physically. And then in addition to the word soup on the card, it's hard to parse out. It's not easy to understand. It's not easy to contextualize all the pieces. You'd have to have like a roadmap broken down. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think that one of my issues with like word soupy cards, especially as we're getting into a lot of modern Magic card design, is that there is so much extra text that is shoved onto creatures nowadays. And sometimes it's just very, very difficult for new players to get into it because 2-drops used to be pretty simple where it's just like, all right, here's my 2-drop 2/2. Great. It has some keywords. Maybe it has an ability like Ash Zealot, right? But at the end of the day, I would say that it was around 2, maybe 3 things that it did at most. And now it feels like that we're getting so many cards that do like 4 different things on them, and it's just so overwhelming.
I would agree. So what we kind of wanted to talk about, and this is something you can do with purpose, or you don't have to do this intentionally. It's just something to always put a little pin, put it in the back of your mind while you're designing a cube. You can either be really intentional about what we're going to talk about, or you can be, I guess the word I'm looking for, May, is considerate, right? On the viewability of your cube in regards to how players, when they're passing cards around and or deck construction, need to understand what the card says. And I was thinking about something before I started writing this. It's, what is it? Reads the card, explains the card kind of thing. It's always like this kind of jab that we throw at each other whenever we're getting mad, or we're being Magic players that are mildly hostile, or whatever you want to call it, right? It'll say, read the card, explains the card. Right.
And now
Right.
we can't even make that joke anymore.
You really can't. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, because some of these cards, when you read the card, doesn't necessarily explain the card. And that's okay. And I think that's just something that we as cube curators and cube designers can always have in our thought process while we're designing, is how the cube's viewability and accessibility will be presented to others. And, you can develop this, as I was writing this, you can develop this concept based around your meta, your play group, your circle, and or if you're going to a wider audience, there's a lot of considerations based on what we're going to talk about.
Following with the topic that you mentioned, that making sure that reading the card can explain the card is such an important aspect of getting people used to the game. And especially when you have a bunch of people that aren't as into Magic as you are, sometimes it can be very difficult to keep track of weird nested mechanics. And I think that one of the big accessibility problems that we've been having is things like dungeon, initiative, the ring tempts you, things like that, where when you read these at first glance, it does not explain what it does. And even if we take it to the next step down, I'll say, with like map tokens, right? Where, all right, you can pay 1, sacrifice it, target creature explores. What does that mean? I understand what it means. You understand what it means. But there's no guarantee that Timmy coming in to play your cube for the first time is going to understand what that means, right?
Yeah, and it's easy for us to assume as cube designers, when we're putting these cards together, it just depends on where you're at, right, as an individual when you're designing. And it can be hard to try to see these situations through the lens of others, right? As we kind of talked about during our 100th episode, I mentioned the fact that I have a hearing problem. I obtained that from my time in service. In addition to, I have a problem now as I'm getting older, my vision's starting to go out, right? And then I'll go ahead and throw in, I've got some definitely undiagnosed ADHD. I can't even say the word. But you get my point, is when I'm designing, I am taking into consideration now new things actually that have come upon me, right? Like my vision going out. So now I'm thinking to myself and designing like, man, I need to read the cards in order to put this cube together. So I have to imagine people passing around the cards need to be able to read and understand, and they need to be clean information on the cards. So I guess my thought process has changed with time as I have changed with time. I've evolved with Magic. Does that make sense, May?
Oh, absolutely. And it's definitely something that I've thought about a few times, because I have audio processing problems. So there are just going to be times where no matter what the person is saying, I just can't hear them over whatever else is happening around in the room. And it's not because I don't want to hear them. And it's not because I can't hear them in that sense. I just can't understand them. And sometimes it's hard when we have to explain an in-depth mechanic multiple times throughout the cube, especially when I'm in a crowded environment, right? And that's just my personal thing.
Yeah, no, I'll kind of go with a different aspect of that. Silence is deafening for me because of the tinnitus, right? So I like the loud music and the distraction and the noise going around while I'm drafting Magic cards. And sometimes my friends or my wife will be like, turn the music down. And that's actually what's allowing me to focus and do the draft. So there is an accessibility thing too. Whenever I wholeheartedly joke about designing the Munson cube, right? And the metal music that I'm playing in the background. I guess that probably explains where that was coming from, right? Like, I actually
Right.
need that to be able to focus on the cards. I can't play in total silence. It's just a consideration. It's stuff that we as curators, we as designers sometimes don't think about when we're putting our cubes together, our lists together, that there's always certain circumstances that maybe your players or challenges that they're dealing with that you can find subtle ways to curtail without having to actually, make a big deal out of it, right? Like it can be very
Right.
subtle and just embedded in the design process.
I was just going to interject in saying, I think one of the things that I really like about the cube curation space is that we have a lot of people that tend to be very courteous and understanding of what the players need to have a good experience. And what's good about that is so many curators have started leaning into the beauty and simplicity of Magic, and there are so many cubes being made that just kind of have less quote-unquote wordy cards.
I would agree. So kind of running down a list, because I did put together like just a short and clean list, but it would be stuff. And some of these, I definitely break these rules, but it'll be examples of designing around accessibility, including cards with reminder text.
Ugh,
I am a
that
person
one so much.
Well,
Not
see,
in terms of the rule, but in terms of
Yeah.
when curators break that rule and then they bring out their cube, and then I'm in the draft and I'm just looking at art and I'm like, okay, great, this is lovely, but what does it do?
Yeah, I'm guilty of this one 100%. Even in my design of the Monopoly, I wanted the important cards to be the full size, full frame cards.
Mm-hmm.
But then I realized I was cutting out the reminder text for a lot of them. So I need to revisit that now, because they're strange and different and unusual cards in Magic. They're not everyday cards that people are going to recognize. And so my design strategy was to make them pop and make them pretty, but I think I did it at a cost. Whenever it's featured at
absolutely.
CubeCon, right? And you're passing around, you have no idea what plot does, for example. It's just an idea, a way of taking this on. So the next one, we're going to actually do an exercise here shortly, but avoiding textless cards. I'm going to tell you that I'm guilty of this too, specifically in my horror cube. I include the Bolt full text, which I think has had enough time to understand, like, I don't know, from 1993 to present, Lightning Bolt.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also run Damnation and Wrath of God for flavor reasons, but I also do explain to my drafters that those two cards are in there and this is what you'd expect. And oftentimes I'll pull them out and show them. But May, what are your thoughts on textless cards before we get into our exercise here shortly?
Hate them. My previous
That is
comments
fair.
apply, but instead of just, yes, this beautiful art card that takes out the reminders text for some reason. I didn't add that before because I kind of skipped over it. My apologies. But it's one thing to have, all right, here's the fancy showcase version that kind of takes out the reminder text, and it's just like, great, what does this do at a glance? And it's another to just take out the text box entirely and be like, well, good luck.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The next one we kind of go into is like the mechanics that you choose. Stuff like haste, vigilance, flying, flashback. These, I mean, I say flying, I call it a mechanic, but it is trample. These have always existed. It's just so players have adopted them. So evergreen is actually a better way to approach this type of design, where at least for players who have some Magic history, they can fall into your cube and start drafting without having to relearn ideas. I'll tell you a little story. I remember, again, this is circa 1998-ish, and we're sitting around with our buddies, and we're playing some kind of tabletop Magic, sitting around enjoying our evening, and I had secretly come out with Shadow as a new mechanic. And I think it was in Tempest, if I'm not mistaken, and I hadn't told my friends. I'd picked up some new Shadow cards, and I put them in my deck, and then I'm trying to explain to them that they can't block these cards. And they're losing their minds, May, because they want to block. I soon figure out that the mistake that I have too is that I too cannot block. And so they attack me relentlessly and destroy me. But that was an interesting situation where I introduced a brand new mechanic. I kind of didn't explain to my play group at the time, which was all four of us, right? And I just wanted to win, so I introduced this new idea. And the next thing you know, we're busting out these little tiny rules books trying to argue back and forth about how to deal with Shadow. But it's just something you want to be mindful of whenever you're doing cube curation. What are your thoughts on that, May?
Yeah, like sometimes even simple mechanics like Shadow can be misunderstood for what they do because they're just unfamiliar keywords. I find it so many times where fear or intimidate will come up in a cube environment, and then people are asking what one does what. And it's happened so often where people flip flop and don't remember what intimidate versus fear does. Do you remember offhand?
I'm gonna try to do that. I'm gonna try. Intimidate it matches the color. So if it has red, it's intimidate, and it can be blocked by artifacts too. But fear was black, can be blocked by black creatures and artifact creatures. Is that wrong or right?
Yep, that's right.
Yes. That was a weird one.
It's a weird mechanic. But it's a case where keywords don't quite work the way that they should. However, to that extent, I would say that when you're playing around with, say, set mechanics, I think that a great example, let's bring back Explore, right? I like Explore. I think Explore is really cool. It provides a lot of options. It can give card advantage in the form of potentially drawing an additional land, card selection. It can make your creatures sometimes stronger. Generally, it feels like a nice modal mechanic. What is hard about it is that if you're introducing Explore into just whatever cube, now people have to go through and try to figure out what does this Explore do, and it's even worse if it doesn't have reminder text.
Yeah, I'll give you my perspective of being a drafter and not knowing. I don't want to interrupt a draft. I don't want to tell somebody I don't understand out loud. It's just my own hubris or whatever you want to call it. I won't mention the fact that it's happening, so I'll just pass the card. And it can be really good. And that actually brings me back to my original example that we talked about where Anthony learns about the initiative. Had a lot to do with that. I didn't want to be bothered with it. I didn't want to learn it. I didn't want to tell everybody I didn't know this thing because they all seemed to understand it, right? So I just passed it. And then I lost repeatedly to it. So it's just an example of...
I think it's a perfect example.
Yeah, where accessibility came online. And then that was more of just not... When we're saying accessibility... Let's kind of go to the definition of that, right? It's kind of the accessibility is the practice of making information and activities or environments sensible, meaningful, usable, and for as many people as possible. So this is kind of just a broad brush of an idea, right? This is so that you can have a larger audience to your cube environment. That's what we're ultimately trying to push here. Let's talk about altars for a second. I think altars are absolutely gorgeous. And I believe it was our good friend Jazarios, May, that gave both you and I these lovely altars. I got the Hell Rider, and you got the...
Fairy Conclave.
Oh my gosh, they're absolutely gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
Love it. And the letters are actually exposed, and the words are exposed, so you can actually still tell what the card does. So that's important. That type of altar, to me, is very meaningful. If I can still tell what the card is and still read the actual text of how the card functions, then I'm in business. But I have seen altars where, and I do appreciate art, and I think it's wonderful that people are doing altars. And I want to be really clear. This is not to diminish the idea of altars. I think they're amazing. As a matter of fact, I use altar sleeves on my stuff, and we're actually an affiliate with altar sleeves. But they also, if they cover the text and cover the words, and they sometimes can change the familiarity or the visual aspect of a card. So when players are passing it around and they're used to seeing, say, this image of Solemn Simulacrum, but now something comes around different, and let's just say it's a kitten or I don't care, a ghost, and it's still the same card and it's been modded, it may not catch the eye based on familiarity. So that, for me, that is a consideration when seeing these type of cubes.
I agree. Like, when you're playing around with art as the aesthetic for your cube, it's important that you're not just, I'm going to take, say, Ginger Brute and turn it into, say, I don't know, an Orc from Warhammer or some garbage, right? It has to be a sensible change. It has to be something that people can visually identify at a glance, to a degree.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that, again, I've seen some absolutely gorgeously rendered cubes, but there are occasionally, and it's a lot of times what I've heard from people that get altars is they'll allow the artist to kind of take liberties. So they don't really have like, hey, I want this card to look like this. They'll allow the artist to do whatever they want, and some of them can get pretty abstract. And that's okay. I think it's gorgeous. It just makes it hard sometimes during a draft when I'm looking at this card. And as you mentioned, Ginger Brute just became a pumpkin. And I just pass it around because it just is a weird example, but it does kill the familiarity of the
I
card
do
for me
have
sometimes.
a very direct example of the thing that people do that I think should be kept in moderation to a degree, and that's switching out miscellaneous cards for just anime girls. That's it, even when it makes no sense. Like, I saw one that was like Grist as an anime girl. Like, you look at it at first glance, and that's not Grist.
No,
Right?
no. I got my whole feelings about this topic, and it's not. But, I've got a 16-year-old son, and I've had to, I grew up, I'm a 46-year-old man that grew up on Tom and Jerry, right? So I've had to adapt to this type of art, and I do appreciate it, but it is definitely becoming prevalent. It's not my personal, I'm not drawn towards it.
Time and place is the problem. If you
it's a
slap
time and
down,
place for me
say, an
personally.
anime altar of Chandra, I'm not going to blink twice about it. But if you take Chandra and just swap her out for insert some character from a popular anime, completely unrelated, then I'm going to be like, I don't know how to assess this.
Yeah, I can actually see that because it changes. It's a visual cue. If you had some kind of anime drawing, but it still had, red as a primary color and they did diamond shape, to represent fire, and it was still, you understand what I'm kind of visually
Right.
drawing here? You could still see that as Chandra. It's when they start going so crazy and going out there. Yeah, I have difficulties with that as well too. But that's neither here nor there. People want to do altars, that's fine. It's just that is a challenge of passing altar cards around a table. And also, altars again are gorgeous. I love to stare at them, but it also slows down the draft because people are staring at the cards. Because the oohs and ahs are definitely there, and I can appreciate it. I truly can. It's like a museum of magic, and I think they're absolutely wonderful. And again, I want to give another shout out to Jazarios for giving us these two amazing cards. I get compliments all the time on my Hellrider, so thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. The other one too is special rules or modified rules, and this has been happening a lot, right? And I do respect this idea. It's a lot of the CubeCon cubes that are coming out now. They have modified rules to the game, and me as an individual, I'll just say it. It's not my cup of tea, right? Like, I appreciate that people enjoy it. I just don't want to make Magic is already a complex game and it already has enough rules. I personally don't want to add modifiers to the game of Magic. Again, I'm going to keep saying it's not meant to offend. If this is what you enjoy, you enjoy. But it's just not something that I am personally drawn to. How do you feel about special rules, May? Outside of the big spender cube.
The fact that you have to specify says it all. I really like custom rules. However, I will actually go on like a little bit of a tangent because there was a project that I was working on called the Volo's Monster Manual Cube, right? And the gimmick is that essentially everybody starts with an emblem, and you essentially write down with like a dry erase marker the creature type that you've last played. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, you make a treasure token equal to the amount of creature types that you've played so far. And it was a kind of neat concept to be like, oh, you have to care about the subtypes, and you're trying to play as many different types as possible so that we can increase the amount of treasures that you're generating each turn. But the issue is that trying to translate that custom rule into a way that was accessible requires me to actually physically create those emblems. It is not something that I can just explain offhand and expect people to get it.
No, I would agree 100%.
In the case of Big Spender, I adore Big Spender. However, there is no easy way to explain what it does, even if mechanically it's not complicated. And that's what's hard about introducing custom rules. We already have a complicated game, and it can be overwhelming for a lot of players because they're like, I already have to keep track of so many things in Magic. I don't want to have to think about these two.
Yeah, I'm the old man yelling at the clouds. I tend to not lean in towards modified rules overall. But for those that enjoy it, rock on with your bad self. But it is a consideration when you're designing these type of cubes, is that additional complexity or modified rules they can actually harm accessibility in certain factors. So it is just something you should be aware of when you're designing your cubes.
Before we move on, I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the accessibility designs that Wizards of the Coast has kept in mind, especially when it comes to Infinity type cards and things like Chaos Orb. Things that require external physical elements can also be very difficult in terms of where your cube is located, who's able to actually do these things, and a lot of external elements that kind of take away from your environment. And while I respect people who try to play with these within their environment, and I think that they can find their home, just keep in mind that it requires a certain place and time. And then the second thing that I wanted to mention was that sometimes there is a skill level accessibility problem when you introduce cards like Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod can slow down the game for players who aren't familiar with Birthing Pod or the environment, but it also rewards people to an extreme degree who do know the environment and do know Birthing Pod. So it actively puts you at a disadvantage for not knowing those things. And when you are building your environment, it's important to keep those in mind, especially when you have lots of different Birthing Pod-esque effects or complicated tutors, lengthy progressions, we'll say.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Like any kind of additional complex game pieces is always a consideration. I like the fact that you brought up tutors. I would go ahead and throw in fetches into this idea too. These are accessibility things, right? We're doing a lot of deck manipulation, a lot of shuffling, a lot of changing of the game, which I do enjoy that personally, but it is always a consideration when you're designing your cube. Do you agree with that statement, May?
Oh, absolutely. Like, it's one of the things that has always been a bit of, I'll say, tap dance on the line of accessibility for the Fey Cube, because I want to be able to reward people for understanding to play around with Changeling and treat them as a way to be able to grab things. For example, I have like Treefolk Harbinger, right? Grab a Treefolk or Forest from your deck, put it on top of your library. It's very unassuming until you realize, oh wait, I can grab literally any Changeling cards, so things like Nameless Inversion is now just tutorable. And it's not something that's impressionable at first glance.
But my overarching question for you, May, before we get going to this, does designing with accessibility in mind hamper complexity in your mind?
It can. I won't say never, but it can.
Okay. Because you're choosing, I think, well, what I'll do is a counterpoint, and we're going to talk about it. We're kind of jumping the script here a little bit, but our friend Sam, who we had on our recent episode talking about our beloved gut, he's designed Sam's shiny single-sided cube. I think I got that right. That is fully complex, but as a matter of fact, I'll just jump ahead and I'm going to read it to you. And this kind of summarizes the idea of what he's saying. So this is from his TLDR, which I'll include in the show notes, but I thought he said it so well. To answer the question, this high-powered cube format doesn't require the mental drain that comes from having to store and recall information that is not printed on the cards, i.e. Monarch, Initiative, the Ring Tempts You, etc. Nested mechanics, map tokens, the double-sided cards, with the goal rewarding card evaluation and context over the ability to memorize cards. The cube runs the version of the cards that have the rules text for non-evergreen mechanics. Card versions have been set to the ones in the cube to reflect this. And then he goes on to say this cube's aesthetically driven, etc. But this is something that Sam, we talked about if the complexity in his cube was harmed in any way. And I'll tell you from a drafter, this cube, absolutely not. It's just he's chosen to make sure that flavor text exists. That there's no extraneous pieces in the game that have to explain cards. I think it's just a great exercise in how you can be mindful of that. And he even joked about it. He said, I can't be bothered to look at the back of a Magic card if it's not the back of a Magic card. And I thought that was the best quote ever. Yeah. Or I'm a person that runs two-sided cards in Uberbear's Horror Cube because Innistrad is riddled with this idea. But I
love
have become
transform cards.
Yeah.
I get it.
But I think they have a time and place.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Time and place is absolutely the takeaway when we're talking about these things, is just making sure that, hey, let's just take all of the obnoxious things and throw them into an environment. Then it's something that you're might have to reel back on as a curator.
So May and I are going to do a little exercise, and I'm going to and we haven't pre-looked these up. I have thrown in, and these will be included in the show notes, which will be included on our Google Drive and as well as our Discord. But I have went through and did a Scryfall search for textless Magic cards, and we're going to pretend like we're in a draft. And I'm going to ask May to be the one that checks me first. And I'm going to go through the top four, May, and then I'm going to have you do the second four. And then we'll kind of just move through this till we get bored of it. But could you Scryfall check me, please, if you'd mind pulling up Scryfall?
Yep, got you.
All right. The first card that I'm going to do is Bituminous Blast, and I'm going to try to guess this, but it's for 3 colorless and Rakdos. Okay, I've got full art in front of me. The art is gorgeous. I think Bituminous Blast is the one that has Cascade. I think it does 3 damage to any target.
It is Cascade and 4 damage to target creature.
Okay, all right.
But
cool.
the fact that it has that level of specificity. There we go.
Yep.
Nailed it. First try. Says a lot about what we mean when we're talking about textless cards.
Yep. So I'm going to do this next one. I'm going to do Blightning. I think I can do this one. It's 1 colorless and Rakdos. I've got this weird looking elemental thing on there. I think Blightning is 3 damage to an opponent and they have to discard a card.
Discard 2 cards. You were pretty close.
Discard 2. All right. This next one. Brave the Elements. 1 white. I have no idea.
I have no idea either.
I don't know. I don't know what Brave the Elements does. What does it do?
So, apparently, it's choose a color. White creatures you control gain protection from that chosen color until end of turn.
Good to know.
I mean, it's a cool card, but...
the art is fantastic.
There's a lot of cards.
This next one's fantastic. Burst Lightning is the next one on my list for one mountain. Okay, this is the kicker one. So I can pay 1 mountain. I can do 2 damage to any target, or I can pay the kicker cost. Don't ask me what that value is. I think it's 4 colorless and 1 red to do 4 damage.
So you were really close. It is 4 colorless, and the rest you are correct about.
Yes. All right, May. Let's try yours. Let me pull up Scryfall. We're gonna do a couple here. We're gonna have a little bit of fun with this. So you read them out loud. I'll type them in.
That one is too easy.
All right, what does cancel do, May?
Counter target spell.
All right, you got that.
Everybody knows cancel because that's like an iconic card. Granted, I'm enfranchised. I know what cancel means. Yeah, we've had so many different cancel variants that it's hard to not understand what it means as slang when we're this enfranchised in the game. Celestial Purge. So, I think this is the one that's exile target multicolored creature? I think? I don't remember.
It is an instant, and it's exile target black or red permanent.
Damn.
Yeah, I mean, you got within proximity. I mean, you can at least yell it till... Yeah, if you start yelling at the cloud, somebody will lean in and go, yeah, I think that's about right. Let's do
command
that.
Tower. Come on now. Really hitting me with the command tower. Condemn.
Our next one is Condemn.
Uh-oh. I have no idea anything about this card, but I'm going to take a guess. Target creature can't attack or block until end of turn?
Yes, I don't mean to giggle. It's a really great card, actually. A lot of Commander players will play it. It's Condemn for one planes. You get an instant. Put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness.
Ah.
Yeah. And so the list kind of goes on and on. We could goof around with some of these, actually. There's some of them when I was looking at it. Most of these I could name off the top of my head, but this one's always been one of my favorites. May, I'm going to try to do Cryptic Command, and I'm going to screw this up so bad. This is the one with the little gillfish, but I'm going to try it. So, Cryptic Command, which is the full art version that I'm looking at right now, for 1 colorless and triple blue, I get to choose 2 modes out of 4, if I'm not mistaken.
It is
so
4.
I can choose 2. So I choose to bounce target creature. I can choose to draw a card. I can choose to tap down all opponent's creatures. Or I can choose to counter target spell. And yeah.
So it's target permanent back to its owner's hand. So counter target spell, return target permanent to its owner's hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, or draw a card.
Yeah. It's pretty close. But that one was one of the first ones that I remember when it came out, and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, how do people memorize this? But as we proceed down this list a little bit, there's a couple more that I think. Here's one that I thought was pretty funny. May, would you try to explain to me what Omnath, the locust of creation, does with the full art context?
I can't even explain to you what that card does.
I can't either.
Without the full art.
All right.
I'm going to be real with you.
So I'm going to read this card because we're not even going to bother that one. This is a full art. I think it's really great. It's full art. But when Omnath, the locust of creation, enters the battlefield, draw a card. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this is the first time this ability has resolved its time, if this is the second time, you add red, green, white, blue. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. 4 or 4 4. Did you get all that out of the full textless art?
Those were certainly words.
Those are certainly words.
Something about landfall. Moving on.
Moving on. So I've posted all these in the show notes for the listeners to enjoy, and I apologize again for my voice, but it is what it is. But I thought it was just so... Without doing this, I would challenge the listeners to do this. Without looking these up, go into Scryfall, type in full art cards, and see how many of these you can actually get right without reading the errata text. It'll be immediately to your right, but just have a little bit of fun with it. And I started looking through these, and there were some of these cards, I have no idea what they do, even if I tried. There was some that were so obscure, I'm like, why would they pick this? And I'm not going to bother this card. It was Jedit the Kajaran? I don't know. It's a big tiger on it. Don't care. But like, it's a full art, whatever. I guess it's neat, but you can see the challenge when drafters are passing these around. If you include these in your cubes, it does create a challenge to accessibility within your cube environment. In addition to it, actually will create an interruption during the draft if the player has to ask, out loud, hey, what is this full art card doing in the draft? Not only have they given away information during the draft, but they've also stalled the draft. And then you as the curator have to now explain what the card does. And so I just want everybody to be aware of that or mindful of that when we're curating our cubes. Do you have anything to add to that, May?
No, I agree. I think that going through these cards really drives the point home of when people like us, just people that are actually enfranchised in the game, are having a hard time remembering what some of these full art cards do. It might be a sign for you to reconsider those in your environment.
I would agree. So that's kind of accessibility, kind of from to do with this episode, kind of keep it short and sweet. We wanted to put that little, that thought in your head when you're designing your cubes to just be aware of this type of situation. And one way you can go about doing that is openly discussing it within your comfort level with your players, right? But maybe people are willing to say, hi, my name's Anthony. I have to wear reading glasses all the time now, and I have, this problem with my hearing now. And these are things that do impact my draft in a certain way, right? It's just something that, players can be mindful of when they're designing for their friend groups, etc. May, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, another thing that I'll add in that regard is that sometimes you might have friends who have certain accessibility needs, like mutant deaf friends, etc. So if you include, I don't know, gotcha as a mechanic, maybe don't consider that for your audience. Just a thought.
And I think ultimately, this goes to creating a cube for a much broader audience, right? Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised how many more people will get the opportunity to play your cube. And again, it wasn't at the cost of complexity. Using Sam's single-sided cube as an example that kind of followed some of these ideas we talked about, and we have other cubes we're going to talk about in the future, you can see where curators can still design, but they can be really intentional about how to keep the game. Again, I want to kind of sum it up with what he said again. This high-powered cube format that doesn't require the mental drain that comes with having to store and recall information that is not printed on the cards. Monarch Initiative, the Ring Tempt You, etc. Nested mechanics, and double-sided cards. With the goal of rewarding card evaluation in context over the ability to memorize the cards, the cube runs the versions of cards with the rule text on them for non-evergreen mechanics. That really puts it in the summary. Laid it out nice and clean there. May, do you have any final thoughts before we go to the socials?
I think that was the main things that I wanted to talk about this episode.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, May, for joining us, and thank you for the audience for putting up with my sniffles here. We'll be feeling better soon, but we wanted to have an episode, put together for you guys. So I appreciate everybody listening. Other than that, we're going to move over to the socials. We're going to first start out with thanking our Patreons: Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nicholas Lapointe, Stephen Conefall, Preston, and Samuel McKenna. Also, if you want to join the MTG Facebook drafting page under facebook.com/groups MTGCube, where I am one of the admins on there. It is a wonderful group where we talk about basically all things cube, pack one, pick ones, design ideas. Hey, I'm building my first cube. How do you think I can help? It's become quite a big group, and I'm enjoying it very much. Also, if you love the show, we would truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite pod player. Also, UberCube is an affiliate with Ultra Sleeves, which we talked about during the altering portion of this conversation. If you use our code /UberCube, you can get 5% off of your purchase. And if you want to support the show, we are also an Inked Gaming affiliate where you can get your playmats, dice bags, etc. That's where I got all my UberCube mats from. Absolutely love it. And you can also find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. Or you can join us on Discord, where there's a link for the show in the show notes. And we also have a Patreon. It's Patreon /UberCube. Thank you for all our Patreons for supporting the show. And then other than that, May, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to say...
Happy cubing!
Cubing!